Hi everyone! Today I'm going to show you how to master container tomato growing, and I'm going to share 5 tips so you can grow a lot of tomatoes in your containers. Now, tomatoes are really the queen of the garden. Everyone wants to grow tomatoes. So whether you're a beginning gardener or you're a more seasoned gardener, the tips I'm going to share today will ensure that you have success growing your tomatoes in containers, because it is a little bit different than growing in raised beds or in ground. So let's dive into the video. The first tip to take your container tomato growing game to the next level is to choose the right container and choose it wisely. Now for tomatoes, you really want a container that's at least 12 to 24 inches deep, depending on the variety that you're growing. Now I love growing in the fabric smart pots because you definitely want containers that have really good aeration and good drainage. The smart pots provide that, so the water will drain out the bottom, your tomatoes won't get root rot. Tomatoes have quite an extensive root system, so you do need a really good container to accommodate the large root system that it has. The other reason why aeration is important is because it allows the roots more oxygen, and the more roots and the more healthy of a root structure you're going to have, the more tomatoes you're going to grow. So for a full-sized or an indeterminate tomato, which means that your tomato is going to grow over the growing season, produce tomatoes all season long, it doesn't die until it frosts in the fall or early winter, you want at least a 10 or a 20-gallon container. So these tomatoes here are going to grow 8 to 10 feet tall. So this 10-gallon CaliKim Smart Pots is big enough to accommodate the large root system and the large tomato plant as it grows. If you're growing a determinate variety, which is a smaller variety, tends to be a more compact plant or a dwarf plant, like the Tiny Tim dwarf tomato over here, you can grow it in a 5-gallon container, depending on the size of your determinate tomato. Now, Tiny Tim is a dwarf, only gets to about 3 feet tall, so the CaliKim 5-gallon is a perfect size for a smaller type of tomato. So if you want to be successful in growing tomatoes in a container, you definitely need to choose the right size container for the variety that you're growing. Tip number 2 for growing lots of tomatoes in containers, very critical here, is to choose a high quality soil. You want to avoid using your garden soil as it's just too compact and often doesn't have the nutrients that a container tomato needs. So you want to choose a high quality soil at your garden center. You want it to have plenty of nutrients, maybe some compost and worm castings. If you want to save some money and make your own, I've got a great video on a DIY soil mix that contains coco coir, worm castings, compost, and vermiculite. So I'll pop that in the video description so you know exactly how to do that. But let me show you an example of a really good high quality soil mix. You can see how this soil here with Tiny Tim is nice and loose. It's going to drain really well, but yet hold on to the moisture so the tomato plant doesn't dry out in the container. This one has coco coir, vermiculite, and worm castings. And it's super critical if you want to grow lots of tomatoes in containers that you invest in your soil. Tip number 3 is tomatoes love a lot of sun, so place them in the sunniest spot in your yard. 6 to 8 hours or more is optimal to grow tons and tons of tomatoes. This spot here gets about 6 hours a day. If you are short on sun in your garden, if you have less than 6 hours on your deck or your patio, or you just have a really shady backyard, choose varieties that are smaller, more compact, like the dwarf Tiny Tim, or this one here is called the gumdrop tomato. It's a smaller cherry tomato and it doesn't need as many hours of sunlight to ripen. Along with a lot of sun, you want to grow them in the warmest months of the year. They love between 70 and 95 degrees, so in the summer months, they're really going to thrive. Tip number 4 for growing lots of tomatoes in your containers is watering and fertilizing. This is probably the most important tip that you can possibly do. Now, containers dry out a whole lot faster than raised beds or in-ground gardens, so they need watering and feeding a lot more often. If you allow your containers to dry out, your plants are going to get stunted and they're just not going to do as well. So you do need to have them on a regular watering and fertilizing schedule. Now, I have mine here on a drip irrigation system. They get watered every 2 days for about 10 minutes apiece. But when the temperatures start to heat up, I may have to bump that up to every day, 10 to 15 minutes, or even twice a day. The most important thing you can do is check your containers to see if they need water. Super easy to do that. Just use your finger, stick it in the soil about 1 to 2 inches deep. If it feels dry, you're going to need to water, but if it feels wet, you can wait on the watering and check it again the next day. And you want to water your containers deeply till the water starts to drain out the bottom. That way the roots can uptake the water from the bottom of the container and they get plenty of water to grow. Now, another most important thing is feeding. You gotta feed your container tomato plants every 7 to 10 days if you wanna grow a lot of tomatoes, because the water and nutrients drain right out. So what I like to do at the beginning of a tomato's life, like this little tiny Tim here, is feed them a fertilizer, a little fertilizer cocktail that's higher in nitrogen. This is the fish fertilizer, which you can find at any garden center, very high in nitrogen, and the Vermistera Vitality, which really helps develop the roots. So I've got my little plant cocktail mixed up in here. And I'm gonna give the soil a really nice drenching. At the beginning of the tomato's life, you really want to encourage that nice, healthy green leaf growth. And once it starts to flower and set fruit, like my tomatoes right over here, you want to back off on the nitrogen because you don't want to encourage tons of leafy growth. You really want to encourage the flower and fruit set. So at that point in time, what I do is stop using the fish fertilizer and just use the Vermistera Vitality. Lots of great microbial activity, which is super important to add to your containers and really helps your plants have a nice, slow, steady growth, has good balanced nutrients in it, which will help your tomatoes be healthy. And healthier plants will be more apt to set flowers and set fruit. So again, give them a really nice soil drenching with this about every 7 to 10 days. And your tomatoes are going to produce a lot for you in your containers if you're very consistent with your fertilizing. Tip number 5 is to provide your tomato plants with some support. They're a vining vegetable, and most of us don't have the space to let our tomatoes sprawl all over the place. Plus, it keeps them up off the ground, provides better airflow for them, which is going to keep them healthier, and keeps them away from pests and critters. Lots of different types of supports you can use. The Tiny Tim, being that it's a dwarf tomato, I've just got a small tomato cage on it, which I grabbed at the garden center. However, if you're growing a larger variety tomato, typically the tomato supports that you buy at the garden centers just aren't going to be good enough. But you can kind of modify them a little bit and DIY them to make them a nice tall support. So here for my gumdrop tomato, which will grow about 8 to 10 feet tall, I've actually got 2 different garden center tomato cages in here. It's got one on the bottom, and the second one I inverted and then attached it here with cable ties, so it makes a really nice, probably about a 7 or 8 foot tall support. So I've also got a really great DIY super sturdy tomato trellis in my book on raised bed gardening, which is very inexpensive to make out of concrete remesh. And one of my favorite supports, which we're going to install today, is the Titan tomato cage, super sturdy and very tall, so it's a perfect choice for a tall tomato. Now ideally, you want to install your tomato supports at the time you plant. But let's get real. We get busy, we forget. Pretty soon our tomato is tall like this one, and it's really hard to install the support. But I'm going to show you a little trick that I use that makes it very easy to install a tomato support on a tomato that's already growing. And this is just super, super simple to do. So what I have here is just a piece of shade cloth. You can grab an old bed sheet if you want. The problem with installing a support on this tomato is all the branches are going to get caught as we install the tomato, and it could break them and damage them. So what I'm going to do here is just wrap my piece of shade cloth around my tomato plant to protect it during the installation process. And I want to get it up a little bit higher on the plant if I can, so I can still get the tomato cage in the container. So very carefully wrap it around. And I'm going to clip it here at the top. You do want to be very careful in this process so you don't damage your tomato plant. But I'm going to grab my trellis here and just very carefully place it over the plant. And this way I'm not fighting with the tomato branches as I install the trellis, possibly breaking them. And then just very carefully lower your tomato trellis down into the container. If you have someone helping you, it makes it all that much easier. And this is a 15-gallon Smart Pots, and the Titan tomato cage fits perfectly in that. Lower it down very carefully. Voila. Your tomato cage is installed with absolutely no damage to the plant. Now I'm going to throw in a little bonus tip here, and that is hand pollinate your tomatoes, and this is really going to help you grow a lot more. Here's how you do it. It's super, super easy. Now, tomato plants have both male and female parts in their flowers. So what you want to do if you're a little bit short on bees is every time you walk by your tomato cage, just kind of lightly shake your cage And what this does is it moves the pollen around in the flowers, and it really does help you set fruit on your flowers and grow a whole lot more tomatoes. Super easy to do. I guarantee it, you're gonna have a lot more tomatoes this way. By following the tips in this video, you are now well equipped to master the art of container tomato growing and have tons and tons of delicious tomatoes in your garden this year. Head over to CaliKimGardeningHome.com, grab my book on raised bed gardening. You're going to want to follow my fertilizing schedule to really help your tomatoes be productive. And today is the last day of our 25% off Memorial Day sale on all seed collections, containers, books, and garden kits. And with your purchase, you're going to get a free kale seed collection as well as a Grow Your Groceries with CaliKim magnet, and use the code Summer Sunshine to get your discount. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you on the next video.